Hey, let's talk about the boldness that we have in Christ. Reading through Hebrews right now, and in chapter 4, verses 15 and 16 said, "For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities." That means our weaknesses, right? The things that we struggle with, the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. All right? Christ understands our temptations, but he doesn't sin. It says, "Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." All right, so considering temptations this morning, like we just read, Christ was tempted, yet he didn't sin. But a lot of times when the temptation comes to us, right, to us human beings, now we know Christ was in the flesh, but he was also God. Well, so when it comes to us, a lot of times temptation results in sin instead of in victory. But we have the victory if we so choose, because with God all things are possible, right? And so in a couple different chapters over here was a 2 Corinthians 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 is the story of Paul talking about grace, right? We can come boldly to the throne of grace. So he tells us that unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. And then he goes on to say, "For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me." 3 times he went to God and prayed about this situation. He said unto me, "My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly therefore will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and necessities and persecutions and distress for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am made strong." So I was thinking about this. Does the fact that we have access to this grace, to this strength in God, does it make the situation easy? Oh no, it doesn't say that it did. Does it make the circumstances change? No. It doesn't say that it did. It may in certain cases, but in this case specifically, the one we just read about with Paul, it didn't. It didn't make it easy. It didn't change the circumstance. Yet, he said that it gave us the possibility, all right, to not only glorify God, so we give praise to God, we glorify God, but it gives us power. It says his power rests on us when we receive that grace, and that we can have pleasure in those difficulties. Again, it doesn't make it easy. It doesn't change the circumstance, but it does make it possible. Because why? Because it does the work. It's through the grace of God that the work is done. How do I know? Well, let's look at 1 Corinthians 15:10. It says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace, which was bestowed upon me, was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God, which was with me." It was the grace of God doing all the things that Paul did. All the persecutions and beatings and, being accused and put in prison, all that stuff, he got through it because of the grace of God. Not because he was strong in his own power, but because of the grace of God. So I was thinking about this. Our verse in Hebrews said, "Come boldly, therefore, into the throne of grace," right? Come boldly. What does that mean? So I was thinking about that word boldly. Am I there? Yeah, "Let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." First of all, before we come boldly, I was thinking how we have to humble ourselves and admit that we have infirmities, that we have weaknesses, that we have wrong desires, that we have difficulties. Before we come boldly, we have to realize and humble ourselves that we need that grace and mercy and help in the time of need, and even in the temptation, right? Because that was the previous verse talking about temptations. But then once we humble ourselves and come into agreement with God, then we can come boldly saying, "I want to choose your way in spite of these difficulties, in spite of these desires, in spite of this sin and temptation that is put before me." So with that boldness, it's not as if we're making demands. It's as if we have assurance. We can come boldly to him, knowing that he will listen, that he will help, and that he does care, because he was touched, right? In all points he was tempted, yet without sin. He understands. So that boldness is having courage, it's having confidence, and it's having conviction. We can come boldly before him because he is who he is. And he has what we need, which is the grace that makes it possible to glorify him, to have his power rest upon us, and to take pleasure regardless of the temptation or the circumstance. Whatever the difficulty, desire is, we have access to grace. Go boldly with assurance, knowing that he's going to help you. Be blessed.